The Pilgrims' First Thanksgiving. It's by Anne McGovern and it's illustrated by Elroy Freem. There's the Pilgrims and the Indians. The Pilgrims wore the hats, and the women wore white hats and the men wore black hats. And then the Indians, some of them wore feathers. There's a turkey. A long time ago, some men and women decided to leave England because the king wanted them to practice his religion. The king told the people that they have to go to his church. And some of the people said, "I don't like your church, king." And so they decided to leave England. And they left on the ship called the Mayflower. The Mayflower was as big as 2 trucks. So it wasn't a very big ship. And it wasn't big enough. The pilgrims and sailors were crowded together to sleep. They crowded together to eat. And the children didn't have places to play. And they didn't have any toys. And they had to leave almost everything behind. Some of them got to bring their pets. But they couldn't bring any furniture and not a lot of clothes. The children hated the food on the ship, but they had to eat it because there was nothing else. And some of the food went bad because they didn't have refrigerators to keep their food in. And there was not enough water for drinking and washing. So they got stinky because they couldn't take a lot of baths. The children, they had to sleep on the floor. They didn't have warm and cozy beds. And their clothes got torn and dirty and stinky. And day by day, things got worse. The waves got really big. Some of the pilgrims got sick. And after they had been on the ship for about 2 months, they found land. And the land they found was America. It was, they called it Plymouth Rock because there was a huge rock near where they landed. They were so happy to find land, but they were also scared because they didn't know about this new land that they had never been to. There were no houses, no stores. There was nobody there to meet them and say welcome. It was just an empty white beach. But they were glad to be on land. Winter was coming, and the pilgrims, they didn't have a house, so they had to build them. So they slept on the ship at night, and during the day, they would look for food to eat and look for things to build a house. And everybody had to help. And by the time winter came, they were only able to build just a few houses, not enough for everybody to have their own house. So they had to share. Some of the pilgrims didn't make it because they couldn't go to the store and buy new clothes. They had to use just the clothes that they had. And so some pilgrims didn't survive. Then when spring came and the snow was melting, they were able to work again. they were able to build more houses so that everybody would have their own house. But every Sunday, they stopped and prayed. They didn't have a church yet, but they would pray together. Eventually, they built houses for everybody and they built a church. The Pilgrims had to make their own furniture. Remember, they didn't bring any furniture with them. And they had to make their own silverware, spoons and forks. And everybody had to help. All of the children had a job to do. And they did their cooking over a fire. The Pilgrims made good friends with an Indian named Squanto. Squanto had seen people who looked like the Pilgrims before, and so he helped the Pilgrims. And the Pilgrims and the Indians learned to trust each other and learn things from each other. The Indians taught the Pilgrims everything he knew about the land, about the best way to catch deer and how to catch fish without a fishing pole, and which plants were good to eat and what plants were not good to eat. Squanto, he helped the Pilgrims a lot, and the Pilgrim children loved his stories. The children learned things through their moms and dads because there still was no school yet. The Pilgrim children learned how to work hard, just as hard as the grown-ups. They had to watch the cornfield and shoo away the birds and animals. They had to make big roasts and turkeys. They sat near the hot fire and turned the stick that turned the roast. That job took most of the day. They had other special jobs too. They had to make mattresses for sleeping. They walked miles to gather grasses for the roofs of the houses. They also dug clams out of the rocks near the beach. Every day they cooked and served and helped with the washing and making soap, because they didn't go to the store and buy soap. But they were happy. They were happy because they got to practice their religion the way they wanted to. That there was not a king there who told them you have to do it this way. And so some of the Pilgrims stayed in America, and some of the Pilgrims decided to return back home. It was very hard living there, not being able to go to the store and buy things. And so the Pilgrims and the Indians became better friends, learning more from each other. Because in the summer there were different kinds of foods that they could eat because the snow wasn't covering it. And they saw that there was plenty of food in this new land, that they could grow it, catch it, or find it somewhere on the land. And because the Pilgrims and Indians had become such good friends and they helped each other so much, they decided to have a feast. The first Thanksgiving in America lasted 3 whole days. From the forests, the Pilgrims got wild turkeys, geese, and ducks. The Indians got 5 deer. From the waters, they caught lobsters, clams, oysters, and pounds of fish. Remember, they had to eat for 3 days, so they had to get a lot of food together. From the gardens, they gathered cucumbers, carrots, and cabbages, turnips, and radishes, onions, and beets. Corn was cooked in many ways. There were wild fruits for dessert. Thanksgiving was a time for eating and for sharing. So when the Pilgrims came to America, they also brought seeds with them so that they could plant some of their food. But they had to wait for it to grow. And so then after being there for almost a year, they had grown lots of food. All of the Pilgrims took part. So did their Indian friends. 90 Indians came. There were more Indians than Pilgrims. The men and the boys played games and had jumping and running and racing contests. The women and the girls spent most of their time cooking and serving. But I bet they had fun, too, laughing and sharing with each other. The Pilgrims had so much to be thankful for. The long, hard, terrible year was over. They gave thanks for good friends, new homes, and plenty of food. They gave thanks for the new life they had begun in Plymouth.